I appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well. It's a real honor to be present with so many distinguished guests and speakers, and so I'm grateful to the organizers for including me in this event. So I've been asked to give my sense of the world that awaits us in the coming years, of the geopolitical landscape that's emerging today. And that's a challenge in any moment. It's particularly challenging right now when so much is going on. If you look at Ukraine or Gaza or Taiwan, the world seems to be awash with crises. There is political change and even political upheaval in so many countries. Technology is racing ahead in ways that are dazzling but also disorienting. So let me try to impose some coherence on the events that are happening and to give you a sense of the deeper contours of the emerging era in global politics. And my basic point here is that we've now conclusively left behind the historical integration. It was a time when the world seemed to be converging geopolitically, economically, politically. It was a time when autocracy seemed to have been defeated by democracy, globalization was racing ahead, and the prospects for great power peace had never been greater. I think what makes our current era so complex is that all of these characteristics of the former era have faded away at once. Our new era is one in which geopolitical competition is intensifying and strategic rivals are waging sharp technological fights. The international economy has become a battleground. Global governance and global problem solving are in decline precisely when we need them most. And international violence is intensifying as the risk of major war grows higher. Now, amid all of this upheaval, American power is still impressive, but American behavior has become more erratic as American politics become less stable. Now, I'm hopeful that all of this turmoil could still produce a decent future, but I think first we have to understand this new age of fragmentation that's underway. And so let me just take a moment at the outset to sort of remind people of the world that was, this post-Cold War moment, this age of integration. That moment was structured by a set of global realities. Democracy seemed to be trouncing autocracy. The number of democracies in the world went from about 40 in the early 1970s to about 120 by the year 2000. Second, globalization was running riot. Global trade and investment exploded in the decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall and created a deep and complex interdependence. Globalization was related to a third trend, which was a digital revolution that facilitated trade and boosted productivity. It also seemed like this digital revolution favored democracy, particularly after protests that were fueled by social media toppled governments in Egypt and Ukraine in the early 2010s. And these factors underpinned a fourth feature of the era, the idea that great power competition was receding, perhaps permanently, and that major countries would now cooperate to solve transnational problems and strengthen the global rules of the road. And then finally, all of this progress was meant to be underpinned by U.S. power. U.S. alliances provided stability in Europe and East Asia. The United States promoted democracy and globalization, and it tried to rally collective action in dealing with catastrophic terrorism or other problems of the moment. Now, it was all more complicated than this, of course, but these were the basic characteristics of the post-Cold War era. But for a variety of reasons, that era didn't last. In some cases, it didn't last because new democracies or established democracies were more fragile than they seemed. In some cases, it didn't last because globalization also brought inequality and insecurity, which triggered the backlash we still see today. It didn't last because technology was a two-edged sword. It gave repressive regimes tools for tracking and stifling their critics, even as it gave dissidents new ways of critiquing their rulers. And fundamentally, it didn't last because the balance of power shifted. The post-Cold War order was underpinned by U.S. and Western primacy, but in recent decades, we've seen the ultimately rests on a balance of power. And as that balance has shifted, a very new moment has begun. So let me try to explain what that moment is by just pointing to 6 key contours of the age of fragmentation. First, we live in a moment of resurgent blocs and new Cold Wars. Not so long ago, it seemed that geopolitical dividing lines were fading or even disappearing. That's clearly not the case anymore. The lines are getting more clearly drawn in Europe due to Russia's war in Ukraine. The same is true in the Middle East, where Iran and its proxies are facing off against the U.S. and its friends. The same is true in the Western Pacific, where there's a multifaceted competition between China on the one hand and the U.S. and its allies and partners on the other. During the Biden years, the U.S. tried to frame this situation as democracy versus autocracy. I don't think President Trump views it the same way. But one thing that hasn't changed is that the revisionist powers are working more closely together. Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea are doing more and more together, and that's creating more of a bloc-type alignment in international politics. Not every country is picking sides in this struggle, of course, as people in India know well. But global divisions are sharpening, and so is the competition for influence. Second, the battle of ideas is back. We used to think that democracy had defeated all comers, but today, powerful autocracies like Russia and China believe that their illiberal systems are the waves of the future. They're coercing and destabilizing states that stand in their way. And political systems throughout the world are being reshaped by populist movements, some of which are challenging established democracies from within. And so the fight for the world's ideological future is just fiercer than any time since the Cold War. Third, the fight for techno-primacy is raging. A generation ago, the U.S. had just a commanding technological lead over any competitor. It's not the case anymore. China has made huge strides in cyber weapons and hypersonic missiles. It's investing massively in AI, quantum, and other advanced technologies. Middle powers are getting into the game as well. Throughout history, geopolitical competitions have been technological competitions, which means that whoever dominates key emerging technologies may dominate this era. This means that industrial policy is here to stay as countries try to invest in their own strengths. It also means that economic warfare is here to stay as countries use tariffs, export controls, and other tools to try to hold the rivals back. Fourth, global problem solving has never been more necessary, but it's never been harder. Transnational challenges like migration, pandemics, and climate change are worsening, but global tensions are making it harder to solve them by cooperating across geopolitical dividing lines. Just look at the fact that the major powers couldn't even cooperate to keep sea lanes open and the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden over the past year. Fifth, amid all these hot wars, tech wars, and trade wars, the threat of real wars has risen. We see this in Ukraine, we see it in the Middle East, and of course there's a growing danger of a clash in the Pacific. Finally, our era features a powerful but unpredictable America. The U.S. is still by far the most powerful country, but its politics have become more polarized, its system has become more dysfunctional, and its ability to produce stable, coherent leadership on the international stage is open to question. Now, I don't mean to sound gloomy. I think eras of upheaval can produce productive outcomes. It was the tense world of the Cold War that gave rise to the relatively peaceful and prosperous international system we now know. I also think some countries, like India, will find tremendous opportunity in today's geopolitical cleavages. But in order to do so, we have to first understand the contours of the age that have taken shape. Thank you very much.